Meeting of the Montpelier-Roxbury Board of School Directors, March 16th, 2022, commencing at 6:33. Most attendees here with Amanda on screen. So first order of business is public comment. We don't have anyone in the room. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to make public comment? I see we've got several folks. I see
Angela's got her hand up.
Angela has her hand up. And anyone else, just do it old-fashioned style. If you want to make comments, just physically raise your hand. So I've got Angela. Anyone else? No?
Jim, if I could get him to you, I have an email from a caregiver to share.
All right, perfect. So let's do Angela, and then Mia can read the email.
Great. Is it okay to, shall I begin?
Angela, you're muted.
She's not.
Oh, or we can't hear you. Wait, hold on.
Test. Can you hear me now?
There you go. We got you now. Yep.
Okay. I'll take the headphones off. You might hear background noise. Okay. Thank you. Great. Okay. I'm Angela Shea, parent of 3 children in our district. Thank you so much for your time and your energy in general. I want to just take a moment here to note some deep concerns that I have around our special education program, which includes both our process for identification, assessment, data tracking, and use of evidence-based interventions. I'm struggling with our approach to teaching literacy and phonics for all, but especially our neurodiverse students, and I feel like it's lacking. I think we could benefit from a little more standardized process and curriculum that addresses both phonics and screens for dyslexia and has a process that reports out regularly regarding process that's data driven for each student. And I think the pandemic has taken my concerns to a new level, especially around learning loss, which I'm finding pretty alarming, as evidenced by both the state and also in my own living room. And I was hoping to see the ESSER funds support that a little bit more as opposed to infrastructure. And I think that I'm just public commenting because I feel that in order to make a change, that we kind of just have to identify it. And I'm struggling with wondering if it's being acknowledged or not. And so I just want to bring it up, and I'm happy to talk more deeper about it, but I just felt like I needed to bring it up, and this was a place to do that. And I appreciate the time to even be able to comment. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Mia, do you want to read the email?
Sure. This is from Kara Brown, also a caregiver in lives in Montpelier. She says, one thing I've been troubled by as a parent is the absence of any assessment data being sent home to parents. And this is similarly to Angela's. This is around special education and interventions on learning. But she says, including STAR reading and math assessments, which have a very parent-friendly report and are full of useful information, and F and P reading assessments. I believe these should be sent home to parents as a matter of course. I believe the school's reading benchmarks and other benchmarks should be provided to parents as well, or made more easily discoverable on the website. Last year in my kiddos' school records, I found a standard form that tracks a child's progress in meeting each relevant benchmark, not limited to STAR and F and P, but also assessing spelling and mastery of sight word lists. Each fall, winter, and spring for grades K through 4. This was information I would have liked to have been made aware of sooner as a parent, particularly as I was very concerned at the pace of my child's reading and writing progress. I think this information should be included with grade cards and sent home to parents. I suspect that many parents are unaware, as I was, that this information exists. It is a key tool in helping parents understand and address their child's education needs and work with their teachers in addressing those needs. And then she closes with saying, thank you.
Excellent. Any other public comments? Let's call for the screen.
I do see Jason Gingold on the line, who did not know that I would see him, but it's a chance for the board to say hi and Jason to say hi to the board. He's not prepped for anything because I didn't expect him to come,
Yes.
but we might want to just add an agenda item to let Jason say hello to everybody, give a background.
Perfect.
Put him on the spot a little bit.
Why don't we do that now? Jason, and welcome aboard. Great to have you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to crash the board meeting. Nice to meet you all, and thank you for this opportunity. And let's see. I don't know if it's time for questions. Caught me off guard. Sorry, I was just watching from a public.
Totally putting you on the spot, Jason.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Jason Gingold, and I'm just watching as the agenda continues. And I look forward to meeting you all in person and getting to know you all better.
Jason, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Sure.
Excited to have you joining the team in June. And yeah, it's also great to have a principal who's also part of the community. So, yeah, so thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda. We would like to add an item to the consent agenda, or we can do it separately, which is to appoint Jill Remick, thank you, Jill Remick, to the CVCC board, which she's been serving on for a while, but their merger was approved and they're now their own district. And so each district needs to appoint a board member, and Jill's been doing a fantastic job as chair, and has kindly stepped up to do it again. So someone other than me needs to make that motion to put that into the consent agenda. Why don't we just do that? So why don't we do the consent agenda and do that separately?
And I want to pull the superintendent's report very briefly.
Okay, so why don't you make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the superintendent's motion?
Okay, so I move to approve the consent agenda minus the superintendent's report. That's my motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, it approves. And the superintendent's report.
Yes. Well, first I want to say thank you for the thanks, Libby, because, sorry, hang on. Yeah. So many times throughout all of this, it's felt to me that our role, we haven't been able to do enough. And so to just hear that it has meant something. So thank you. That's the first thing I wanted to say. And then I also wanted to follow up on the hiring to see if any board members have volunteered to be on the hiring team for the director. Okay, so I'm just putting a plug in. I know we're all very busy. If any board members could find the space in their schedule to join the hiring team for this very important role, I think it would be really not just send a message to our community and the members of our community who are really have brought concerns to us about special education and student services, but it feels like we could. It's not just a gesture of goodwill. I think it would be really great to have board representation on that committee, because hiring for these key roles in our district are really, really important. So I'm just putting a plug into my fellow board members to please do it.
Yeah, no, it is helpful to have someone on that.
Yeah. I know that this would be late notice because your first meeting on that is tomorrow, right? But maybe if a board member could join for interviews, if they even can't make tomorrow's meeting. The date for interviews, is it still the 30th?
March 30th.
March 30th. So I myself, I know I'm pushing others. I can't do it. I've been on a few hiring teams. I can also attest to how fun it is to be a part of that process. So anyway.
Well,
That's all I wanted.
The 30th all day?
Probably not, because we don't have that many candidates. So I'm imagining, I think 3 interviews would probably be hopeful, optimistic of me.
And does it start early and it's like,
No, one of our parents who's on the committee works nights, so she's asked that we start after 10:30 so she can get some sleep, which is a good request. So we would start probably at 11 that day.
okay.
Amanda, you would be amazing on that committee. No pressure.
I just happen to have my whole day meeting canceled, so the 30th I can do. But I do have a meeting at 3:30, so I'm not sure.
We
That
most
they're-
likely would be done by 3:40, yeah.
Okay, then I can join.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. Is there anyone else who wants to say? I don't want to, or we can move on, right?
Yeah, for it.
Yep. Do you want me to make a motion for that and Jill's appointment? Because we didn't.
Sure, we can do that, yeah. That's it.
So I move to approve the superintendent's report and the appointment of Jill Remick to the
Central Vermont.
Central Vermont Career Center, CVCC board.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Uh, So, student update. And thanks for trekking out all the way to Roxbury. I think you're the first students who have trekked all the way out to Roxbury. Well, yes.
Third agenda for our presentation. So that's something we're going to talk about. So we're going to summarize some recently. So this is a listening session. So we're going to talk about some of those results, and we've had some other meetings about the sort of the topic about diversifying staff and our hiring process. So we have updates to share about that, and then just some of our future plans that we have. Go to the next slide.
So yeah, what's been going on for our community? Yeah, so you can go to the next slide.
You can boss me around. It's all right.
Okay. So on Friday, there was a nationwide youth walkout, and this was to protest bills that were passed recently, such as Florida's what's been dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. And this is also in addition to numerous other anti-LGBTQ bills that have been passed around the nation in recent months, and the theme that's been kind of developing as a result. So in Montpelier, there was a walkout and a protest about that. And there were youth that spoke with state legislators, both inside and outside the state house. I personally was one of those. So that was really great to see.
Next slide, please. So, something coming up is Montpelier's theater department is doing a production of Oliver musical. It's on March 24th, 25th, 26th at 7 p.m. and March 27th at 2 p.m. And students have been putting a lot of work into it. So if you can come, you should.
Is that the good part?
I'm acting within it, and I'm part of mask leadership. So
You're what?
I'm part of mask leadership. So
You're the big boss. Got it. Okay.
So on Sunday, the 13th, the same day as what we'll get into the next slide, the basketball tournament, there was the Vermont State Debate Tournament, and Montpelier competed in that. Unfortunately, we didn't win anything, but some of us won individual awards, so that was okay.
And then also on Sunday, the Montpelier High School boys basketball team won against Mount St. Joseph's at the Division II State Championships, and that's exciting.
And we learned just today that Jonah. Jonah's last name.
I think it's Catanana or I'm not sure.
He was named the Gatorade Vermont State Basketball Player of the Year.
What?
Yeah. That's
Huge. That was a big deal. Yeah, it is a big deal.
Is that one of the lifetime supply?
I don't know. Let's hope. I
I
think it's for
hope
the
so.
district in general, so.
He hasn't done the Gatorade on superintendent's.
No, we don't do anything like that for graduation.
It's not yet.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, guys.
Alrighty, so today me and Zach held a listening session at the high school. And the goal of this was for students to share any thoughts or concerns they have about their education or their just school in general. And so we had a pretty large and successful turnout of over 30 students who expressed a wide range of views. And some common themes, despite this wide array of views, some common themes that emerged were more mental health spaces and support. It seems that although counselors are an option, they're not always students' first choice to go to when they are suffering from or just having these struggles. So that's something to probably consider. Another theme was concern about teachers and how many of them have engaged in things called microaggressions, where they have kind of harm, or just, kind of harm.
There's harm being done.
There's harm being done. And so that's something also for the board to consider. That's been a big goal of RJA and BIPOC Connections, to bring attention to those and to see what can be done about them. And there was also sentiment addressed at this listening session about the importance of having more diversity within staff. And we'll get into that in subsequent slides. Another theme that was addressed was, and a very popular theme with that, was the severe parking shortage at Montpelier High School. It's a very tedious issue for a lot of students. So that was a big concern. Yeah, and adults for sure.
Everyone involved.
And there are also some other points on this first slide about what we heard at the listening session. So you can all look at that if you would like, or we can move on to the next time. It's up to you guys. Do you have a question?
I wanted to just ask for a clarification. I think I know what you mean by content warnings, but could you clarify?
So a lot of what was discussed, like also related to mental health, was giving adequate and like appropriate information about material contained like within whatever we're doing in class. So like content or like trigger warnings, sort of regarding if there's going to be like a heavy topic in class today, like where are the alternative spaces students can go if they like can't deal with that right now. And sort of making that more of a standard rather than like a above and beyond thing teachers sometimes do.
And just to add on to that, sometimes in some classes, there'll be trigger warnings, but it will be like, okay, in 10 seconds, we're about to see this, I don't know, bloody image or something. So I don't know. But emphasis from these students was on those trigger warnings being either in this class before or just maybe on Google Classroom or something, just like more emphasis on that.
Thank you. Yes. And yes, there's there are a lot of things. So we have another section. At the end of the slide, we have linked my our full messy notes that we took during the meeting, if you would like to read that. So we also there was a lot of talk about the classes available and sort of expanding from just US history or even within world history, like sort of learning about something other than like the Russian Revolution or like just European history in general. And sort of talking about different ways to structure the curriculum. So like the integration of extracurriculars into credits, which I know has been talked about before, and sort of the flipped classroom, like lectures in class and then like read a textbook for 2 hours at home, sort of dropping that or shifting away from that to make learning sort of accessible for all the students there. And that's like for curriculum. And then for trainings, we have generally just more trainings in general, or sort of calling in outside organizations to do that work. So it's not being put on students being directly affected by things that have happened, or like teachers within the building who already have like a lot going on and can't like do this other training.
There's also specific for microaggressions.
Yeah, that was also in regards to microaggressions, which I think was mentioned in the other slide. And sort of making consequences for teachers or students who do things like be racist or do microaggressions, making those consequences they face clear and sort of a standard for everyone. It was definitely addressed. And then we have, for miscellaneous, we had a lot about supporting. There were a lot of seniors who spoke about how they do not feel supported going into sort of this next year, and they're like, don't feel like they can like be a person outside of like high school. And so a lot more around like life skills. And someone mentioned the CBLs at the high school have things, modules like how to write a cover letter for a resume, and sort of maybe integrating those into a class, or just putting more emphasis on that in general. And there are some things about better childcare and more paternity, maternity leave for teachers within the building, and then different specific things. Go to the next slide, right?
I just want to add one thing about the idea that students don't feel prepared for like post high school. I remember one student in particular at the listening session who just said that they don't really know what they're, or like, they just don't really know what they're going to do. And they simply don't feel that high school or even their whole education has prepared them for anything besides being in the building, which I think is very important for the board to consider.
Yes.
So me and Zach held separate meetings with both RJA and BIPOC Connections. I personally spoke with RJA regarding diversifying staff. And from RJA, we heard that they really want to make diversification a priority, but they don't want diversification just for the sake of diversification, but for the impact that it'll actually have on students, and particularly people of color in the school. And although RJA doesn't really have super specific end-all be-all solutions for diversifying staff, they're willing to help with anything that would be asked of them, such as interviewing potential teacher candidates, and maybe showing that those teacher candidates that they're welcome here. And also just adding on to something that we talked about a little bit in the subsequent slides or preceding slides, RJA is specifically interested in hiring like POC history teachers, because I feel that there's been a big focus over the years on really just European like focused history, which just isn't the whole world and shouldn't necessarily be that way.
Definitely. And then I spoke with BIPOC Connections, and a lot of the people who are involved with BIPOC Connections are also involved with the RJA, so there's a lot of overlap. But there was a lot about focusing on not just hiring BIPOC folks, but also retaining them, because living in an environment where like there's a lot of racism and a lot of microaggression, and just like being in Vermont in general, a very, very white state, focusing on how to give those people the support they need. So once they're like in the community, they like want to stay and want to be a part of it. And it was brought up that some places in Vermont have been successful using a nationwide search, like working with recruiting firms to get more people looking at Vermont as an option. And being there and a lot of things that were brought up. It was also brought up in our listening session, but something like having a BIPOC guidance counselor would be very impactful for students, and would also likely be supportive for that staff member, because it's difficult to be like a math teacher and have a lot of people like look up to you as this like support model. But as like a guidance counselor, they might be more equipped to deal with that and sort of have those strategies. And also student teachers or like substitute teachers are also a really great option to have in the building in general.
Something else that we heard, I just remember this at the listening session. So even if like diversifying staff is hard, maybe it would also be valuable to have like guest speakers at the school again. We used to have a lot of those in years past, but unfortunately we haven't really had any of those recently. So bringing those back and giving students a valuable opportunity. Sure. So now we have a few future goals for moving forward as student representatives. We're planning on holding listening sessions at the middle school and the elementary school. I've been in contact with the guidance counselor at the elementary school and also with some students at the middle school who've expressed their interest in meeting with me and Zach. So that's exciting.
Yeah, and we want to continue listening to student feedback and concerns, specifically like involving those listening sessions, and also continuing to work with the RJA and BIPOC connections, and sort of with their like strategies and all the useful insight that we have.
Also, we heard a lot from that listening session, and it's not the only thing that we're going to be using to gauge student feedback, but the issues that were raised there, we want to continue focusing on them. So we want to continue finding potential solutions to them, and that's going to be a big part of our role, I think. And yeah, you can also see the like full student feedback notes, which is less organized in our presentation, but if you would like to see everything that we wrote down. Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both.
Can we have a little bit of a discussion? Do we have time for that? Okay. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It's just such a breath of fresh air to have you both as part of the board and out there, what is the expression? Beating the streets, beating the pavement, pounding the pavement. Doing the work, like reaching out to students and getting their input and bringing it to us and helping us, understand the priority issues from a student perspective is so important. So thank you so much. It's already like, paying off and awesome to have you part of the board. I held a listening session. I think, did you both come to that at the high school? Okay. Zach was there. And Zach, you'll remember that a lot of these same issues were raised then. And I made an attempt to get feedback from some of our veteran board members and from Libby and others to bring back to that, because I'm really interested in like being responsive to their concerns. And when you're talking about, a 4-year career in high school, it's like some of these things kind of need to happen quickly, and democracy is slow and bureaucracy is hard. And so it's like, I'm interested in sort of brainstorming ways to be more responsive to this student feedback. One hope that I had was to just give a quick, because I know some people sitting at this table, I even have a little bit of input on some of our progress on some of these issues. I think it would be important for you as student representatives to know sort of where we're at on each of these bullet points and what the thinking is, or what are some of the roadblocks and challenges that we've faced, trying to get diverse staff or those sorts of things, or change curriculum. So I think it's important to know like where we're at as a district on these issues. and then what the future holds, and then trying to be responsive on some of the things that seem to be really quick and easy fixes, like getting a microwave back in the cafeteria. I mean, I'm not sure if that was a COVID thing, but that feels like, why can't that happen tomorrow? And then it's like, bam, we've made progress. It's just one little thing, but it's like a little thing that can actually improve the quality of life of our students, just by that little bit. I know my daughter is like a hot food person, but needs to reheat stuff that's from home. She's very picky anyway. She would hate for me to call her out like this publicly, but a microwave would be really important to her. It would actually like change the way she's eating and the types of things that she's eating at food. Or at school. So I'm not sure how best to move forward with this, and I'd be happy to lend my time to help the two of you sort of make some progress in being able to report back to the students on what you're hearing. But I think it's important to get back to them and be responsive to their call for action. And some things are just going to take time and are harder to accomplish than others. And then other things on this list feel very easy to accomplish. And I would love to make sure that we're making progress on that.
We can move forward on a lot of these issues. And as I said, a lot of them are pretty quick and simple fixes that can still have a significant impact. So I think maybe just a meeting with you, other members, more in depth to talk about our action plan, how we can go forward on these would be valuable.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out a lot of these issues, maybe we can, maybe talk about this, are kind of more, things that should also be really principally brought to the principal and the administration. Certainly curriculum and hiring decisions, we hear about those, but those are really administrative decisions, as is, things around hiring processes. We definitely kind of set a compass on that in terms of what we want to see, but the actual implementation. So I don't know if Jason is still on, but he is, but
I texted him. He's got it off. I sent him the slideshow. That's about his first, 100 days.
Yeah. So
He's picked a good meeting.
yeah, and we can help facilitate those meetings too. But definitely, former relationship with Jason and currently Renee, and they can provide a lot of probably quicker answers than certainly we can in terms of what's being done and what the thinking is on a lot of these issues.
Our listening session isn't specifically tailored to what the school board can or cannot do. It's really just showing what students care about. And
Totally.
Totally.
A lot of the actual solutions and details are things that Renee and June, Jason will know, and Libby knows, and so we definitely want to be looped in, but we may not have the detailed answers.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was just going to add, first of all, I think it's fascinating and really, really neat how you guys got some really to the core of American culture issues, and also included a lot of pieces to support staff, which I think is really cool. And also they're part of that sort of action plan might be reactions or responses or contexts that that articulate that it might not be that simple. I remember Andrew mentioning at our last meeting about one of the biggest things we could do for energy and climate change at the high school is have fewer people driving cars. So do we want to talk about that? I know I'm a state employee. There are now massive parking lots that are empty that used to be a battlefield, not that far from the high school. So maybe there's some quick wins, but also there's some bigger sort of do we want the track? Do we want to cut back on emissions? Is there something else we can do bigger, carpool spot or something like that? But I'm just really blown away just since my 25 years since high school. The awareness and context for what you're learning and wanting to challenge that and hearing that from your students. Like I said, I was really impressed that students had comments about things for staff as well, not just criticism, but rather support that they could use. Well done. Thank you.
Hi.
No, go ahead.
Who, me?
Yeah.
First, I just wanna just take one little step back just to thank Angela for sharing her concerns before. I think like with over, so I just wanna thank her for bringing her voice. And this is so great. I'm so happy of all the feedback. I also want to remind us that we do have the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy that kind of highlights that. So it will be interesting to, continue to have these concerns with the thing that we are, which is in our realm, which is the policy that does talk about expectations of curriculum and expectations of recruitment, practice, and professional development. And I wonder, when we do have an update on that policy, how we continue to have these concerns be aligned with that work for the long-term work. So that is really great. And I think, just wanted to point that out there, that it is kind of all those things are within our policy of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Other questions for Mark and Zach? Awesome. Thanks again. This is fantastic, and we look forward to getting these throughout the rest of the year. On to capacity building with
Me.
you. I don't see Mike.
Mike has some family things going on, so it is me.
Is you flying solo? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure you can handle it.
Yes, indeed. So hold on, let me get the right student's PowerPoint up still. So let me get the right one up. All right. Okay, so this presentation today, Mike and I have been working on this week around the purposes around direction more than anything else, because you just got a beautiful budget passed that has a lot of new capacity building and human resources and in professional learning. And so we wanted to give the board an update of kind of where we are and what our plans and strategies and dreams are going forward in these two particular areas. So when we move into next school year, one of the things that Mike and I, as soon as like the budget passes, we go into like planning and strategizing mode. And so we spend a lot of time together thinking about what are we truly, digging into around our pillar work. And next year, we'll be talking a lot about these two areas. So this is a quick presentation just to give to the board and the community around what are we thinking about right now. And they're not like specific detailed ideas, but they give us the broad overview. This is a statement that the leadership team really played with last summer before we knew what this year was going to be. And it's evolved over time. If you've been, a board member for a while, you've heard me say that all students will achieve at high levels because of what we do every day. Not can, because that enables some sort of thinking of, yes, they can if they want to, but will learn at high levels every day. And our thinking on that has switched a little bit into limitless future, which implies high levels of learning. If you want a limitless future for our students, then they need to have the confidence in a range of skills, right? In order to have that, to not have limits on what they choose to do when they leave us as graduates. So our leadership team is really, really focused on this, and to eliminate the predictability of student success. So 3 years ago, when I really dug into some particular data, it was apparent very quickly that if you were male on an IEP and free and reduced lunch, qualified for free and reduced lunch, there was zero possibility of you being proficient on standardized testing at Montpelier-Roxbury. And I could predict it. I could predict it with pretty much every student I looked at with those identifiers. We want to get rid of those predictions. We shouldn't be able to do that. Any kid should be able to have a limitless future. So this is kind of when the leadership team comes together, this is the statement that we hold on to. Just a reminder, you've seen this slide before. So our theory of growth is that if we have these 4 pillars rocking and rolling in the way we want them to, they're not there yet, but if we do, then kids will have a limitless future. So we're going to focus, or we're thinking about a lot about right now, these 2 last pillars. The first 2 pillars we've actually spent a lot of time with over the pandemic years, and particularly formalized essential learning. It kind of ramped that work up a little bit because teachers figured out, because we didn't have the time necessarily when we went virtual, that they couldn't teach everything they wanted to teach. Not everything was essential, right? We had to really think about that. So it increased that opportunity to focus in on that. And again, with the collaboration, you can't do this by yourself. So we're really focusing for this presentation, while they all are intertwined, around these 2 pillars. The idea of a timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate. That this idea that that keeps coming up to me from parents around, it's like you're waiting for my kid to fail, that shouldn't happen ever. And so we need to redesign our system. Some call it RTI, some call it MTSS, around learning, both social emotional learning and academic learning, so that that doesn't happen, right? And so this is a piece that we're really working on behind the scenes now. It will continue to be a little bit behind the scenes from the systems perspective. But this is the first year I can say, after this budget, and once we get through our hiring season, everybody cross your fingers that the people are available for us to hire, which is big sometimes. We will have the human resources in place in order to put a more effective system, in order to get it going. We didn't have the human resources. So I was speaking, we had the listening session on special education. I was just saying, when I started 4 years ago, there were no interventionists at MHS. We have 400 kids at MHS. Like, there's nobody except for special educators who could work with students who are struggling, but may not be on an IEP. There wasn't the resource. And that to me was mind blowing. I didn't understand why that had happened. And I'm also of the mindset that Jim's heard a bunch of times, that you can't just hire people and put people in the position without talking about the system behind this, behind it. So we've taken our time to get that human resource in play. And then high quality of instruction in every classroom, it's not luck. So if, Zach and Merrick have 2 different first grade teachers, that they're learning the same priority standards. They may have very different ways of teaching it, and I actually hope they do, so that they can collaborate and talk about which way is really effective. But they're teaching the same thing. So this high quality instruction in every classroom takes away the luck of it. So we're really thinking about this this next year, except in kind of different ways than we've thought about it before. So when we're thinking about timely system to enrich, intervene, and remediate, in the most generic, broad sense, where we are right now is that we have very different approaches, not just by school, but by teacher. So there's very different, nobody set the expectations or the system for teachers in this area, and that's not the fault of the teachers in any way, shape, or form. So we're really looking at different approaches isn't going to work. That's guesswork, right? There's different methods, there's different data tracking and systems between buildings. The interventionists are working with up to 20 to 30% of our student population at MHS and MSMS in particular. That's a large percentage that we're saying needs intervention support. And when I say, how do we know they need intervention support, there's not a definitive answer anybody can tell me.
Say that again, how we know they need it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if Kristen were to need intervention support, it could be because Jill's her teacher and Jill's really loud about getting her intervention support without real data behind that. It could be that, right? Or it could be because Jill's really targeted on her data and says Kristen has this universal skill she's lacking. We don't know. Like there's no basis for that. when students,
It's a time management that we must support with.
executive function.
Yeah.
Okay, so students are remaining in EST, that's Educational Support Team, for multiple years. So it's kind of like a student is placed on an IEP without all the process and rules and laws around it. And so they never get out of it, right? And that's not the purpose of intervention or remediation. That's just not the purpose of it. A child should get the support they need, have the proof that they know it, and move back into the general classroom. Or move back, right? So get what you need and then come back, get what you need again. It should be this really fluid process, and it's not. They remain, once they're in it, they're in it.
Did you say that EST is for students not on an IEP? No.
There is no hard and fast rule there.
Okay.
As it is right now, yes, but there shouldn't be any hard and fast rules there.
Yep.
That's getting in the weeds and I can walk out on it, but I don't know if we really want to go there. There's a current separation of service delivery between special education and general education interventionists. Now with Act 173 starting, that changes the ballgame as to who can serve kids who are entangled, big time. And that's like kind of another rabbit hole to go down, but that's going to change. That's going to change by law very soon. It's hard to tell the difference between tiers 2 and 3, and I'll get into those definitions in a second. If I were to ask one of our educators, or possibly even our principals, tell me what a kid needs to get tier 2 services versus what a kid needs to do to get tier 3 services, there is no difference there. There's zero difference. We could not tell you right now. And there's very little specialization in pedagogies for learners who need something very different. So for instance, we're one of the first districts I've ever worked in that we don't have what's called, we don't have somebody who's a specialist with Orton-Gillingham methods. So that's a very targeted, structured way to learn how to read that a small percentage of kids need, but we couldn't give that support to kids because we don't have somebody who has that skill right now. And it's pretty a typical intervention for kids who have that kind of profile. So Mike did link the universal skills draft. This is actually kind of in the wrong place on the slideshow, so I'm gonna come back to talking about that in a second, but know that link is there, okay? So let's just talk about some common definitions that we are working to build within our district. And when I'm showing you all of this, this is where we're going. This is not necessarily where we are right now. So when we're talking about tier 1 or universal first instruction, that's what every single student, when we're talking high quality instruction in every single classroom, we're talking tier 1 and tier 2. Every single student has the opportunity for high quality instruction. They are not taken out of the classroom and missing it for whatever they need. It's with PLC is professional learning community teams. They're determining shared formative and summative assessment of the priority standards, the unit plans. They're conducting data analysis of common student work, mainly because it goes back to that first pillar of teaching and learning is just too darn complex to do by yourself. We need to have teams of people thinking about it. All students have access to first instruction within their grade level or content priority standards. And when we're talking about priority standards, I'll just remind you that's the second pillar. See how they're all kind of connected here? That's the second pillar. And what a and I think I have a slide on this actually later, but if we were to take the Common Core and say we're going to get Zach to be proficient in every Common Core standard, he would need at least 22 years of schooling to make that happen. That's what the research is telling us, which of course we do not have Zach, unfortunately, for 22 years. So we have to prioritize. Instruction is differentiated. It's based on a growth mindset framework. It's intentional, it's goal-oriented, and it's engaging the students. 100% of our student populations fall into this. Oh, here's the priority standard. So it represents the absolutely essential knowledge. And I'll give you an example of this. In the Common Core literacy standards, I can't remember exactly which grade, but there is a standard around naming and providing evidence for a theme in a piece of literature, for the theme of a piece of literature, right? that's probably knowing how to determine theme is a really important skill, because you need it not just when you read, but when you listen to a political speech, or when, like there's lots of things in the media, you need to listen for theme and the evidence for it. There's also a standard that says that students can compare a piece of play versus a movie of the same, Merrick's gonna be fine if he doesn't have evidence of proficiency in being able to compare a play and a movie. So there's some that are less, like, that's nice to know, but it's not a priority, right? So our priorities are what parents will eventually see on the report cards in the younger years especially, and it's what all tier 1 and tier 2 will be tied around. And I'll get to tier 2 in a second. It's also, when we say common formative and summative assessments, you're not having common formative assessments on everything you're teaching, just on the priorities, right? Because what we want to be able to say is this is what we're guaranteeing all students will be able to do.
It is an example of a common formative and summative assessment that every teacher in the same grade level is using the same assessment.
Yes. Yeah. So then they bring it all together, and if my kids fail miserably and Kristen's kids knock it out of the park, I can say, what did you do? Right? How did you get your kids to do so well on this assessment? Right? And we know that everybody's learning the same thing, right? We know what the expectation is. The assessment kind of defines the expectation for the teachers.
Is that for each unit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then common definition for tier 2. This is quite possibly the biggest switch in language for our system and for our teachers. Right here is the switch in tier 2. When we're thinking of tier 2, what we're thinking is prevention or intervention within the first instruction of the priority standard. Okay. So right now, one of the things that happen is that a kid could receive intervention services, anything. But we want to say, no, we're gonna really save that work for our priorities, because that's what we're saying, we're going to guarantee you got proficiency in. These are determined by that PLC team, again, based on the data analysis of the common formative assessment that I was just talking about with Kristen. That it's performed by the teachers within the PLC. So it's based on the priority standards, which is a grade level or content area specific. And when I start wonking out too far down the rabbit hole, Jim will smack me. But I am, if I'm a first grade teacher, I am the expert in that first grade standard, right? That is who the expert is in the first, in that priority standard. So they need to be doing the intervention or the prevention. In the high school, it looks a little bit different. So if a class is meant to do, if a kid has a double literacy block, that first block could be around prevention work. How do I pre-teach vocabulary? How am I pre-teaching some of the skills and concepts that the kids are going to get in the next class, right? How am I pre-teaching theme? So that when a kid comes into the class, they're not hearing it for the first time, it's the second or third dose already because of that prevention. That's a tier 2 intervention for high school. Or it could very well be an intervention within the classroom that I sit next to a kid and we go over it again. Or it could be during Solon block, which the students were talking about earlier. We have that piece, but it's not effective right now. So how do we use Solon block a little bit differently? So our goal here, though, is for 10 to 15% of students to fall into this category. And if you do the math and you have a class of 20, that's 2 kids. That's not a lot of kids who are doing that, right? The way we get there is by following an instructional cycle, something like this. So all kids, we know what kids must be able to do in the rectangle at the top. That's what the PLC does. That's what the professional learning community does together. They design the formative assessments first, so they know where the roadmap is, right? And if you follow the arrows around, they teach that first piece of instruction. So if you have a priority standard, that priority standard is the broad umbrella, and that can be broken down into 3 or 4 what's called learning targets, right? They're smaller. You need learning target 1 to get to learning target 2 to build on each other to get to the priority standard. So the teacher is going to teach that first one and have a formative assessment that the team has already planned out together, say how they do. And then they go into a reteach cycle. That's tier 2, right inside the classroom. Let's reteach for the kids who didn't get it. Let's enrich for the kids who did. Then let's go on to the next learning target. Again, reteach, so it's this kind of, constant cycle within a unit of study. And then when you get to that summative, it is no surprise who still needs more time. And you've built it into the unit design so that there's reteaching at the end or there's enrichment at the end based in this unit of study. So if we have our tier 1s and tier 2 structures rocking and rolling, teachers are doing this constantly. They're introducing new ideas, they're teaching into it, they're assessing, they're reteaching, they're doing this cycle all the time. And the reteach piece is the piece right now that that my hunches is currently missing. The reteach and enrich built right into a unit of study. Then when we get into tier 3, that's intensive remediation. So that link earlier around universal skills, that's where that's where this link should have gone right here. So when we're talking about remediation, we are not talking about special education. We are talking about kids who are missing universal skills. And the easiest way to think about it is that it's about 2 or 3 grade levels below for priority standards. So if a priority standard in 2nd grade is to be able to decode multisyllabic words, a kid's not going to receive remediation on that in 2nd grade. Probably not even in 3rd grade, because that's still opportunity to reteach and intervene in that skill. But in 4th grade, 4th and 5th grade, they're really still having trouble decoding multisyllabic words, then that's remediation. That's a universal skill now that kids really need. And there needs to be a plan. There needs to be formative assessments tied into it. It needs to be very targeted. So it's not just the child will decode better, but the child will decode better through this very targeted skill area so that it can be no more than 3 weeks, right? We can hit it hard really quickly and then get them out of this. And the parent is part of that process. So right now, the evidence I have from the information I'm getting from parents is that parents are not part of this process right here. And that's a major missing piece. As a parent, if my kid's receiving remedial services because they're missing a universal skill, you're darn well, I want to know about it, right? Be a part of that process. So there's some examples here. It could be some different literacy programs. It could be a special course in high school. It could be something like reading recovery in 1st grade. And our goal is to have no more than 5% fall into this category of our student population. Because kids who need intensive remediation need an expert with them, helping them through it, and it might take more time. Oftentimes, if one kid's lacking one universal skill, they're lacking multiple universal skills. And it's all connected to the tier 1 and 2 piece because they didn't get it earlier, right? So right now, this is much different. So when we're doing this, our interventionists are spending most of their time here and not at the tier 1 and tier 2 level. Our interventionists like to be at the tier 1 and tier 2 level, and they don't necessarily like to be here. So this is where we're moving that shift, is that our interventionists should be dog tired by the end of the day because they've worked so hard in this remediation area on the universal skills. It's probably our weakest link right now that we need to work on the most. And then the idea of the data systems is really important. Where we are right now is that we have some screener data and other local assessment items. Our staff is unsure what each assessment types are used for. So I'll give you an example. The screener data, in some areas, we put way too much prominence on. It's a screener. Like the word screener should clue you in as just like, it's like a very quick hitting overview. It is not an in-depth assessment in any way, shape, or form. And while people who publish screeners like to say, oh, we can tell you exactly what the instruction needs to be after a screener, no, you can't, right? Because like these guys took screeners in high school, but the texts they're reading in high school are long and thick, right? And so their skills need to be we need to be assessing them within the text that they actually read, not short computers passages, right? That's just an example. So a screener gives us an example, gives us like, hey, there's some red flashing lights here. We need to do more. We need to do more assessing in order to figure out exactly where this child has some more work to do. A screener is not the end all be all thing. Like our educators don't know that yet. And one of the challenges is that because they don't have that knowledge of what type of assessment to use with which, sometimes they put too much emphasis on a screener. So when you sit in a parent conference, they talk about screener data as if it's the end all be all. And that's not accurate, right? So there's a lot of data literacy that we need to do with our teaching staff around that kind of work. A lot of teachers also don't own this assessment info. When I hear teachers saying, Jim, come do my assessments for me, or the literacy coach is going to do the assessments for me, you need to be sitting next to that child and seeing what they're doing as they're doing the assessment. And so that tells me they're just not owning it. They're not understanding what they can get out of it for their teaching. And we don't have a formal system to keep and access data. It's very hard to find. If you said to me, Libby, show me the first grade Fontes and Pinnell reading scores right now, I couldn't do it. I'd have to find somebody who might be able to put that together for me. So it's hard to inform instruction when it's hard to find. And it's also hard to celebrate growth when it's hard to find. Where we're going is to use multiple sources of data that can be triangulated to show us exactly what a student needs. We need our data very easy to find and use. We need a formalized system that's accessible to anybody who needs it. We're getting a system called VCAT where we actually have it right now. Mike's just populating it. And we need a knowledgeable staff around data literacy. What do you use for what? What does the score mean to me as a teacher? How do I use it tomorrow? Not, I'm going to wait 2 weeks for somebody to tell me how to use it. And then just quickly, the idea with high quality first instruction in every classroom. We've really gone back. There's so many different ways to build capacity here. And one of the pieces that I'm really landing on from a superintendent perspective is that the piece that our kids have lost the most, and quite honestly, our staff, is community. And how do we get that back for kids? And what does that mean for high quality instruction? So the thing I'm thinking about, I'm calling it, and I don't know if I read it somewhere or if it came out of my head, I don't know, is this idea of what's a pedagogy of wellness? So what does teaching for wellness look like? What teaching strategies do we want to see every teacher using next year that has this wellness mentality for kids? And so just, this may not be it, but just like really early brainstorming, because I'm really looking forward to a new leadership team coming in. This is what we're going to do this summer, is really dig into this. I'm thinking about passion and engagement, right? So a pedagogy of wellness has kids truly engaged and passionate about, they're not going to be engaged and passionate about everything they do, of course, but there's something, right? And so these are pictures from our district across multiple years. This was from a physics class. I went in to observe, I was just peeking into the class, and these guys around the table were so involved in the work, they didn't even know that 5 adults were watching them, which is kind of bizarre. When I walk into a room with 5 adults in a classroom, people usually are like, what are you doing here? They didn't even realize we were in there. They're totally engaged in whatever they were working on. This was actually this past year. I walked in, same thing. These kids had designed different things. They had water, they had pool noodles, there were all kinds of things going on in this engineering class. That the kids were designing flotation devices or something along the line. And they were totally, when I said, hey, what you doing? It was like 3 different groups were jumping at me, excited to tell me what their project was. Also, I'm thinking about compassion for others. This is a piece that I think as a society, we really need to focus on in terms of how we work with kids. You know, so are we really looking out for the other fella kind of thing? I steal that from Camp Abenaki. So again, just different pictures from our school in past years. A piece of pedagogy that I really want to think about for how we build the capacity in our teaching force is what are the natural ways we can get more movement and talk into our students' lives. I think kids are way too sedentary right now, and through no fault of their own, really, it's kind of the world that we've lived in for the last 3 years. So how do we get more movement, and how do we get kids talking to each other academically? How do we get kids talking to each other appropriately and respectfully? How do we get kids knowing how to disagree really well? How do we get kids to understand perspective? Quite honestly, how do we get adults to understand perspective? So I'm just thinking this, you can't really see from this picture, but this is a younger kids class and they're all like they're totally talking to each other about whatever science project was in front of them. This was from this year at RVS, which was one of my most precious days when they're digging out potatoes together, but having this whole long conversation about them potatoes. It was so great, the pre-K class here. And then fun. Anytime we're talking about wellness, we got to add fun into the picture. So what are we doing to intentionally bring fun to the table? You know, how are kids, can't you just picture the giggles underneath that parachute right there? You bring the parachute out, there's always giggles. It's just going to happen. For tall people, for all people, exactly. So these are just like some of the things I'm thinking about that I'm really excited to dive into with the new leadership team coming in, as well as with the staff. How do we really think about it? And these may not be it, right? There may be other components of a pedagogy of wellness that we could really focus in on, but how do we really focus our teachers' work to say, in units of study, I'm planning for talk. I'm teaching kids how to talk. I'm planning for movement. I know strategies that I can do that's not lecture. I know how to get kids up and talking, moving in a classroom. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. This is totally not leadership planning. This is Libby thinking right here. So you should just know that too. But that's about it. So within those two pillars, that's really what we're thinking about. And I'm happy to, I can talk about this for hours, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And if I go into too deep, then Jim will smack me.
Pull you back out. Questions for Libby? Merrick.
I just have a few comments on your presentation. I thought it actually hit pretty right on with a lot of things. Like regarding instruction, there's really no reteaching at all. Like I don't think I've ever seen reteaching in my classes, except for maybe review before summative, but even that, like no reteaching. So I totally agree with that. The second thing was regarding like assessments. I assume you mean like tests like STAR testing at our high school specifically. I can definitely say that those are not totally accurate. Like most students are either not caring when they're doing those or they're not doing them well at all. So I don't think they're a good measure. And then the third thing is I really like your Pedagogy of Wellness instruction. I think that shifting away from just lecture-based and just like, I don't know, just like classroom learning and really shifting it more towards project-based and actually applying what you're learning is so much more valuable, and you learn so much more from that than just like, I don't know, doing a test.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah, we got to do something there. Most definitely. I think when I am in the high school, I take the long route to the bathroom from my office so I can be in the halls and see people more. And I just started doing it a couple of years ago. And it's quiet. It's really quiet every day, unless it's, during lunch transition or something like that, then it can get slightly louder, but never too loud. It's just a really quiet place, and schools, I don't know, should be that quiet.
Other questions? Mia?
But I also want to say thank you for this, not just for us, but also for sharing it with the community, because I think it reflects a lot of what we've heard of the frustrations and concerns that parents have been feeling, and it is a good, it's just really good to see that there's alignment there, and that you're acknowledging it and saying, here's what we're working toward. And I'm curious on the where we're at pieces that you shared. If you could give us a couple of examples of things that you would say that we're doing well right now on the where we're at.
Within these two areas?
Yeah.
First I want to say this is a seismic shift, right? And it's not an MRPS only shift. But Kristen can think of her school district that she's working. It's a seismic shift in belief structures and systems.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So some things we're doing really well. I think that the vast majority of our teachers build pretty good relationships with kids. There's always a couple, but the vast majority of them I'm not worried about it. I also think while there's learning to be had, I trust our educators' decisions that they make in the classroom. Well, there's always learning and there's always mistakes, of course, but I think that's not a piece of this puzzle, right? Which in some places it is a piece of the puzzle. I think that we are doing really well at UES has already started some of these shifts and they're seeing success in it. And so we now have a system that we can look at and say, it's working here, this is what they're doing, right? So I think that's a big piece that we can start celebrating. Like this small change happened and this happened for kids, which is different, right? Like they could connect the dots. So that is really exciting. The work around the prioritized standards is happening and is going really well. So we now, Mike, this is Mike Berry. This is completely and utterly Mike Berry. When he took over, he didn't have a system to work on curriculum. There just wasn't anything built. You know, there was no curriculum teams. There's no way to do that work. So it wasn't surprising to hear the third grade team say like 5 different things they were doing at that moment because there was just no structure in place for them. Like, why would they? They wouldn't do it naturally, you know? So Mike has put together curriculum teams that are vertical. So not only is the prioritized standards happening, but it's happening in a vertical fashion. So we know that we're not, I was joking with my husband last night, or my daughter, I was like, what are you doing in social studies right now? And she's like, I was like, well, it's gotta be Pilgrims, Native Americans, or American Revolution, because that's all your brother ever learned, right? Like there's that repeat kind of thing happening. So if you're doing it in a vertical fashion, that repeats, like that's not happening. Mike's work with the curriculum is really top notch. And the teachers he has doing that work, the teacher leadership we've been able to build through that process is also top notch. And we want to increase teacher leadership big time. That's a big time goal for the central office leadership team. So some of the structures and the systems are now in place to do the capacity building. So there are a lot of really good things that are ready to go. There was also a lot of success last year in MSMS for some strategies they figured out. Amy Kimball in math, as the math interventionist and coach there, did some amazing things asynchronously and virtually that really engaged kids on fractional knowledge that we need to hold on to. We learned some things there and we need to hold on to it and expand it. And Amy could teach some things to the high school. How you can do that. So one of the questions is how do we expand knowledge base and get people talking to each other more? So we have a lot of really good things in place. And if we can get through positive COVID cases and anxiety and energy being pulled elsewhere, we can rock and roll a little bit quicker.
Kristen.
Yeah. I'm having the same feeling that I had at the last meeting of like the massiveness again, and like the word seismic does feel really, fitting in. It feels like we're, getting a new house manual, like how you run the house.
That's a good analogy.
Really going to be shifting and changing. So one thing that was coming up, the pedagogy of wellness, and thinking about passion and engagement by students, and thinking back to Zach and Merrick's presentation around interest in seeing the curriculum renewed and kind of based on in part fed by the students and the times. Like I sure hope that your world history curriculum looks really different than mine, 25 years ago. It really needs to. So I'm sure it does, but you know what I'm saying? But what are the opportunities for the students to be like moving person partners with our staff and our administration and co-creating that curriculum together? And clearly we have a lot of really inspired and motivated students, and to what extent can we tap into that with curriculum shaping?
And electives offered at the high school, particularly asking the kids what they want to take electives in. Yeah.
And I think national and cultural, like we are having this moment of like systems are breaking, right? We've been seeing a lot of fissures come out via the last 2 years, which is possibly the only silver lining, but it's really magnifying things for us. And so this seems to be just such an opportunity for rethinking. So I guess, you know, I'm on board with all this. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, you know, rubber, meets the road kind of stuff with like when, who, how, like the steps and the timeline, like this is like big vision, but like, you know, based on where we are at today and like how soon could we expect, and it's not overnight and it's gonna be piece by piece, but like, you know, as a parent, I would very much be looking forward to this kind of education happening for my student and being able to get this kind of feedback and having, you know, the data piece, you know, in check and knowing that like the education is being based on real data, you know, that it's not luck, like you say, but it's craft and it's science.
Mhm.
So like how soon or what are, I guess, yeah. What's a timeline? What do you see as the big steps? Like, who are your partners and making sure that this is happening at the classroom level for our students?
Yeah, so we're getting a brand new leadership team for the most part this summer. And so this summer, the leadership team will be doing a lot of work together around making sure we have a common understanding. That's number one, right? And the principals, while some of them will be new, working on what exactly can we target now, that kind of thing. So schools are in different places and it's not lockstep, right? So the way that I like to lead from a systemic perspective of here are 4 pillars, here's the common definition of all these 4 pillars, and you know your schools best. Which ones are you really targeting in on? Yes, the district is focusing in on making sure we have the structures and systems in place for our timely system to intervene. Yes, we're putting a lot of effort there and we're working as a district to build that system with the players at the table. And that may not be what MSMS is going to focus on completely in front, right? They may choose to really focus in on how do we engage our adolescent kids. Like that might be the question that the MSMS staff works on, and that's a fine question. That's perfectly great, and they're going to focus zero in on that. If we're running this smoothly from a board's perspective, and I've talked to Jim how this is how I really want to change how I bring information to the board is that you have at least 3 or 4 presentations around this is where we are right now. You know, the principals are here. This is the goal that we've made for UES. This is our plan. And then they're going to come back, right? And then they say, this is where we are. This is the data to show our growth. This is where we think we need to move next. And we haven't gotten into that cycle in the last couple of years. And I will make the excuse of COVID, but we need to get into that cycle. So the board will see that. As for a specific timeline, I can't give you a specific timeline because we're talking about humans and kids, right? It's not an assembly line of change. So this is where our focus is going to lie, though.
Would you be able to give a timeline on like when you feel like because you'll have a better handle on the data, like it'll be easier to find it. So when do you feel?
Yeah. So we would be able to have that. We're going to be able to have that after our first local assessment window. So we have 3 windows that we call throughout the year. And the first one happens in October-ish. And this is mainly a K-6, more of a K-6 thing than a 7-12 thing. Nobody's really figured out the data piece for how to collect it in a way that's understandable at 7-12. But after that assessment window, then we'd be able to say, this is what our kids are reading right now, you know, on a broad scale.
Okay.
Absolutely. And
So
we can make that.
this year.
Yeah. Well, October this year. Yeah. Yep. So next school year.
Right.
Because Mike's populating it now. We're going to have plans to get the teachers trained up in VCAT and how to enter data and what's that mean. And then once that happens, once we got that going, then it's so easy to pull reports and say this is where we're at.
I just have a comment. I think it'd be very valuable when that leadership team is meeting this summer and beyond for student voice to be heard as well.
Absolutely. One thing I heard about Jason Gingold, our union principal, who's nodding his head right now, is that student voice matters, right? And so I know his plan is to be bringing me all in and talking.
Give it a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Amanda wants to talk. Sorry if I didn't see you earlier.
It's hard. Your hand, Amanda, is right in the yellow flower behind you, and it's hard to see it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for this. I have a question regarding the assessment data, and I wonder if like if we have like what they're called, and how parents have access to that data for their own individual children. And then I love your long-term vision and like how we're gonna get there. And I'm just wondering for the kids now who are not gonna be able to be there, like who are not gonna get the future. Like, what are we doing for them right now that you feel like it's worth, like exploring, saying like these are some of the needs of the kids that we have at each of these grade levels. And then the third question is around desegregation of data and how the district is looking at, kids with, low economic, low income families and BIPOC. I know that like the whole BIPOC, we talked about that, but how teachers look at their students and say, okay, like, wow, our low income students are doing poor in this, just making an example, or like BIPOC kids are not doing well in this subject. Or so if there is that conversation that happened at the district level with the leadership.
So I'll start there. That's very hard to do right now because we don't have a system like VCAT in place at the moment. So when VCAT is populated, teachers know how to use it because it's a new system for us, right? Then you can run a report. So you literally could pull up a class, check free, reduced, special education, gender, right? You could check those 3 boxes, and then it pulls up a report and shows the scores of kids, right? So you can see where they are there. So we will be able to disaggregate the data very easily when that system is up and running. We cannot do that right now. We can't do it easily right now. We'll put it that way. So that was the first thing. Second thing is that our intervention teams and special educators are working to change their mindset and how they run their daily schedules now. It's almost like they needed permission to do that. It was interesting. It was interesting, right? So like and not so much special educators because they're still working under old special education rules, but they will. This is more interventionist. I met with them. Mike asked me to meet with them to do very similar presentation for them, right? Went into more wonkiness in depth with the educators, but it's almost like they needed permission from me to say, you know what? Find those kids that you've named some universal skills. Find the kids. Let's start working. Instead of the team teaching that you kind of like to do, let's start really working on some of these universal skills. And so right now teachers are it's like some research that they're doing right now for themselves, some action research, which is good. So right now teachers are starting to change their practice and how they schedule themselves and all of that kind of good stuff. And I can't remember your third question, Amanda. You're muted.
You're muted.
If what the name of the assessment data and like if parents have that for their individual child.
That needs to be a larger conversation with each leadership guiding coalition and what the common expectations are. We don't have common expectations across the district for that right now. So I think it depends on the teacher.
Common expectations for parent involvement?
No, for data distribution to parents.
Okay.
I think it's totally dependent on the teacher. And it's interesting because, if my kid's teacher tells me that they're reading at an F, like that benchmark from Francis and Pinnell, which is what we use, the letter kind of marks, as a literacy expert, I know exactly what that means, right? You don't know what that means, nor do you know. So for me, it's not so much that parents get the F, like the letter F. I'm not talking about failure. I'm talking about like the level of books.
Yeah.
That's just right. For me, it's your child's reading at this level. These are the things that means they can do really well. These are the things that will be the next steps for them to work on. This is how you can help them at home. Like it's like that conversation and knowing that progression so well of literacy or math, that the progression of skill. And there's some capacity building to be done around that.
That's why that spreadsheet, the universal skills spreadsheet, that felt somewhat accessible. It didn't just say literacy level F, it had.
Yes, the
It had a
skills
little
and the
bit of a, like,
strategy.
this is what it kind of looks like. And it felt
Exactly.
like that would be a thing that could be very useful for parents, just as an example. I'm sorry, Brett had his hand up, but I do have a couple other follow-up questions.
So fingers are crossed on the 4 interventionist positions that we're hoping to fill, bringing us to 9. Are interventionists anchored to grades or buildings, and how do they interact with professional learning communities?
Excellent questions, Frank. Excellent questions. So they're tied to buildings, yes, for the most part. And they're not necessarily tied to grades, although they are at the elementary school, at Union Elementary School. And that's simply because of expertise more than anything else and what the expertise and experience is. So how they interact with the PLCs, or how they will interact with the PLCs, is that what we need our interventionists and our special educators to be, we need to be them to be the experts in untangling learners, right? And so when there's that reteach and the PLC is sitting together saying, I'm not really sure how to teach that differently, right? That the intervention is also at the table saying, well, let's really analyze what's happening here. And did you try this? Did you try, so giving other ideas for the PLC, just being another expert at the table. But what I really want them to do is, if a kid is struggling with fluency, I'm sorry, I use a lot of elementary literacy examples because that's where my experience is. And if I start using high school math, then it's just going to be embarrassing for me. So I'm using elementary literacy. But if a kid is really struggling because they can decode the words, but they read so slowly, which is a common thing to see, I need my interventionist to have a playbook of strategies that we know work, and that they are going to go at those playbook, and they're going to move that kid. I need them to say, well, they need really easy reads to retrain their brain as to how to read faster. They need to read like an opera singer. They need to read in a whisper. They need to have these strategies in their heads, and can share that with PLCs as the expert. So we have a lot of capacity building and skill progression work.
So follow up, how does RVS fit in this particular building? How does it fit? Are there interventionists that will be here?
Yeah.
Okay.
RVS is an interventionist here. Yep.
So it's a little different, because I know that multi-grade teaching is a little different. There's a little bit of extra professional development that has to happen, but it fits into, it has a place. Sort
of?
Okay.
It's the same process. The PLC process might look a little different because they don't have a group of people to work with that are doing the same exact thing. That's the actually trickiest piece here for us, is how do we get the PLC process moving forward in a different direction? And what's trickiest about it, because people will be like, well, they could just be with UES, which would be accurate if we had the same school schedule.
Right.
But because of busing, we don't, right? So it would be awesome if we did, we just don't. So it's not an option. So how do we figure that out in a different way? And there are small schools. Franklin Elementary School has learned how to do it up in Franklin, Vermont, way up on the border. And before the pandemic, Beth and Joyce, who is the principal there, had connected a little bit, but I want her to go and see how Joyce has designed this, because she's done a top-notch job. We need to get more information from very small schools who are doing this work well. There's a couple up in Franklin County that really are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Did you have follow-up questions that were related to the, okay. Yeah, I just want to echo appreciation and just what a beautiful thing it is to actually be talking about learning and education, and not like how to manage our schools amidst a global pandemic and guidelines and protocols and I don't know, federal dollars. And, it just feels so nice to see you talking about how to improve kids' learning. And And I just can't say it enough, like how exciting it is that we're sort of at this point now in the pandemic.
Find some wood to knock on so we don't lose.
Yeah, I mean, just, yeah, for whatever it is. I mean, when I had a question about where we're at with proficiencies, and then I made a note about, before the COVID-19 struck, I had a meeting with Mike Berry. A group of us were talking about the health education at the middle school, and he launched into this really impassioned speech about where he's at with identifying priority standards, and had this huge spread. His office was just like walls were plastered with priority standards, and he was like having all of these meetings with the curriculum teams, and it was like he just was, you could tell he was getting a lot of momentum, and he was at a good place with like, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have a direction that we're going in. And then it was like, all stop. And he became the interim principal of the middle school. And like, so it's just really heartwarming to see like, okay, we can like go back to the things that we do best and that we're trained to do, and you all seemed as if you had training in managing a global pandemic. But, it's just nice to see you in your true wheelhouse. So I would like to know sort of where you think the district is at in terms of proficiency-based grading and identifying those priority standards. And maybe that's better for a time when Mike can speak to us, but.
Mike and I can speak with the same voice here.
And then
share the same brain.
And one other question, on slide 12, you talked about sort of the wellness pedagogy, but you also talked about, and you mentioned this at another time, I heard you talk about community and how do we get this back, after 2 years of sort of don't talk to your friends, don't, like watch a movie during snack, like all of these rules that are in place, like how do we start, what are our benchmarks to start moving towards these things that bring us together? And I've had a lot of feedback from community members around, wanting to know sort of, okay, so now some of the mandates and restrictions are being lifted. When can we start doing these things that we used to love doing to help our schools? So one thing that came up was the Four Winds curriculum at the elementary school, but things like that that we have at all of the schools. If we have a sense of if we're going to be moving towards those community things this school year, or if we're going to be putting that stuff on hold for next school year. And I do think it might be, that topic might be more than for tonight. And it might be worth having sort of a community engagement, / listening session just on that topic. But anyway, those are my questions.
I mean, hopefully we'll be able to move into that this spring. One of the pushes that I'm pushing on the principals right now is get the kids out of the building. We used to take great field trips. Let's take field trips. I don't care if it's education or not. Right, let's get these kids out of the building together.
And the kids are asking for that. Yeah, I don't know if you guys are hearing.
Yeah, so
kids want to do that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So that's like kind of the latest push. Right now, our educators need permission, right? And so, and we as leaders need to think about what they need permission about, because it's a kind of guessing game. But that's right now, that's our that's one of our pushes that leadership is doing with the teachers of like, you used to do some really cool ones. Let's go get them out. Let's get them out. Let's get them talking to each other. Let's get them in public. Let's do all of those things that we know are really good, that schools do well and have always done well, is getting kids out on cool field trips. And I feel like I'm talking about my kids a lot today, but one thing that my kids' middle school has done really well is taking field trips for fun. Like my 8th grader went to North Beach when it was cold, so there was no possibility of going in the water or anything like that. No danger. But they hung out on the beach and played beach volleyball. They've gone ice skating twice, which Jake hates. He would be mad at me if I didn't put that out there. But still, like I can imagine, he tells me he hates it, but I bet he was laughing like crazy with his friends on the ice as they all fell over each other, right? So like I'm pushing with the principals, and they're in touch with teachers, is doesn't necessarily need to have the education focus in that way. If the education is about community and laughing and talking with each other and building experiences together, that's like the part of the community that's missing. It's building experiences together. So how do we do that this spring? That's a big question I have for like next steps. Forgot your first one. Sorry.
Oh, it was about where we're at with like proficiency
Oh,
based.
thank you.
Grading and
So,
identifying those priority standards.
so that's a really interesting question, and MRPS has had a really interesting growth trajectory there, because when proficiency-based first came out, MHS was probably a leader at trying out some new ideas around what proficiency-based could look like, right? They were one of the first out of the gate in the community, from my understanding, Jim, correct me, the community was pretty much behind it, right? You know, like Mike McCraith was leading at the time. He was able to really paint the picture as why this is a good move in education, why this is a good shift in education.
Yeah, and some other neighboring districts are really struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Chittenden County at the time, and people were up in arms over this switch. And so the high school led the way in kind of switching. The elementary schools have kind of always been in a proficiency-based system, but not intentionally. And to an extent, up to, when I say elementary, I mean K-6, right? 7, 8 is kind of lumped with high school a lot of times. So they did some things, they designed some things, they had some things working, and they had some things not working, right? So I bet these two will talk about summatives quite a bit with a capital S, right? Because summatives are really important, aren't they?
They're really the only thing I think. Like you could get an A or a 4 in your class just by doing summatives. You could probably, I don't know, so preparedness grades, which is like everything else kind of, you could, it's like homework, you could probably not turn in any of your homework and still get a passing grade in your class very easily if you got all 4s on your summative, which is pretty interesting.
Right.
Or learning. That's not proficiency-based learning, right? That's test taking. And so one of the things that MHS is grappling with right now was that they were celebrated for making the switch, which they should have been celebrated, and now we know more and should do differently. And that's a big focus of mine, is that, sorry, I keep pointing at you there, is that the summative is not the end all be all. Actually, the formatives are, right? The formatives are where we should be really putting the most attention so we can reteach in the classroom. Formatives are what matter. And the summatives should not be a surprise to anybody.
I tuned into your cloud-based diagram. And I was like, I'm just curious, like how many teachers are really doing it this way at the high school
It's a big
level?
shift. No, it's a big shift.
Okay.
Big shift that's needed and not quite understood yet.
Yeah.
And then at the other piece to proficiency-based learning is that we have it's tied to priority standards, right? So we have our priority standards. Each priority standard will have a proficiency scale attached to it that is public knowledge, that the kids all know, right? And that the parents all know. And so the kids know what proficiency is, and they know how to get above proficiency, and they know how to get slightly below, it's clearly laid out for every priority standard, not for every standard, not for everything they learn, but for every priority standard. And that's the big shift at the elementary school, because you could have a kid score a 3 on a report card right now and 3 third grade classes, and it means different things to every kid, right? So with a proficiency scale that's tied to our assessments, that's not possible.
Common assessments, common rubrics.
All of these things, yeah. So those are the structures that we're building, K-12, right? So we have some work to do, and it's a little tricky work because we were so celebrated when it first came out, as we should have been. And now it's time to move forward from that because we know more, so that our kids, I don't know, do you still have the, I don't know if it's changed now, like the 6-week summative cycle?
That's kind of up in the air. It's shifted really to like a semester-based grading system. And then like summatives can be anywhere within those. So it's up to the teacher how many summatives they want to have and like when, which I think is good. It gives the teacher more freedom. But I just also wanted to add about summatives themselves. As I'm sure any student will tell you, they're an intense stressor that just isn't contributing in any way, in any good way to like mental health or just any positive experience I think in general.
pre-pandemic, the system that MHS had in place, it was either like 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I can't remember what it was, but every teacher had these priority standards. They had to be taught within 6 weeks, and the kids were given a summative at the end, right? And I saw when our former student reps were on the board and just in the high school, the amount of anxiety kids had during that summative period when all their classes were given these huge summative exams. Like, we were building that anxiety. The teachers were like, it was just the kids. The teachers were anxious. Like, it was contributing to that big time. So it's much different if you're targeting formative assessments, reteaching, teach some more, teach some new concepts, and formative, and reteach so that students feel supported and confident, and teachers feel supported and confident. And it's a different mentality. And our high school teachers in particular aren't there yet. Some of them, many of them. And I don't know if it's a different shift, but it's a less hard shift for our K-8 teachers.
And it's interesting how the culture like sort of went in that direction, because that's not how it's being done at other schools locally, close by, you know.
No, but they also had a lot of hardship in shifting to the idea of
So maybe they did it slower.
Yeah, and you know,
Anyway,
it's indicative that that Merrick and Zach say credits and not proficiencies. Credits is a very traditional way of thinking about high school coursework, right? So there's some indicators that we know more now about this work because we've been in it for a while. So systems and structures have to change a little bit.
Amanda?
Sorry, I forgot. Let me lower my hand. That's an old hand.
I did have just I'll promise I'll keep them quick. I see the time. Where would you say, Libby, that partnerships with caregivers factor into the where we're going? Because we're hearing, you know, from parents and caregivers, the desire for more information so that they can be in partnership with the teachers to support their kids. And so I'm just curious how you would see that factoring into you know, I'm thinking about that slide that you had that was the where we are and where we're going.
I think it's I could talk on that for a while. I think the traditional parent conference structure is archaic, and we should be talking to people more rather than 2 times during the year. I just had my Lena's parent conference today, and I was like, this is 20 minutes of wasting your time and mine. So
for the record, I don't find them to be a waste of time with my kids.
No, I love hearing about it, but at the same time, like, I didn't learn anything that I didn't already know. And so I think we need to talk as a staff as to how we share information with families. How do we explain the information, right? Because I'll say it again, I've also been in parent conferences where my kid's teacher hands me their reading assessment and says, this is where they are.
Yeah.
And like, I've got the background, but what if I didn't have the background? I'd flip out possibly over what I'm seeing because I don't know if is that grade level appropriate or not, but you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to need to have a conversation of how do we talk to parents? How do we do it more often? How do we fit that into our workday? Right? And how do we explain what's happening about learners in a way that's not edgy speak? Right? One of the things I did as a second grade teacher, for instance, is I'd have 3 levels of books in front of me, you know, with a parent conference, and I'd say, your kiddo's reading here. I'm going to get them to read here. This is how I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, if you really want them to be acing reading, you should be having them read lots of books with it. Yeah. You know, and show them this is the type of book that I'm talking about. I'm talking about Henry and Mudge. It's episodic. It has very basic, you know what I mean? Like, but that kind of information I think is the most helpful for parents. You know, talking to our parents of really young readers to say, please stop saying sound it out. Please don't ever say that to your kid. They don't know what it means. Stop saying it. You know, like it's tricking them up. Instead,
I actually said that last night.
instead say say them slowly, right? Say the sound slowly, right? And you can be more teach parents how to help is a different way to do it. Yeah.
And I think that's what we're hearing from parents is they want the information and the entry point in which they
Yeah.
can be supporting their kids' learning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
So you give Zach the last question and then we can go into the follow agenda.
I just wanted to echo sort of the importance of having that standard across, even though we have like a proficiency-based system, like actually making that a proficiency-based system. I moved from Texas, and so there we used like traditional like letter and number grades, and I think with every report card there's a little explanation of like 3.5 is this and whatever. And I think it was very difficult, at least for my parents and me, to sort of understand how that translates, like, into credits. Because, like, is a 4 a 100? Like, even if you do all, like, get everything right on a quiz, for some classes, if you don't go above and beyond, whatever that looks like, that's like a 3. And in some classes, it's just an automatic 4. So, like, I totally agree that having that standard across all of those classes is incredibly important, and I really appreciate that you're doing that.
Yeah, well, it's gonna take a while.
Well,
Yeah, it's the right one to do.
Great. Thank you, Libby. We love these discussions.
Clearly.
Yes. Learn a lot.
I do.
Can I just ask one quick question around like the community listening sessions? I'm not sure where that will fit. Because I just wanted to ask, because a lot of what you're bringing up was in those sessions too, and some of the students things. So, and going back to what Emma was saying before about how do we go back to the communities that we are hearing from, in a way that we can take what they were saying, that they were concerns, and matching it to what we're doing as a district. So there's a feedback mechanism, per se, to say like, we are listening. And just wondering, I know that I went to the listening session that you did, Libby, as a parent, because I, just for my kids, my kid, but just wondering how that ties in, because we're hearing from the same people, and I just don't want to overburden people with the same questions and the same listening, and then we're having the visioning sessions. So I just want to make sure that we're all aligning so that we're not overburden parents to have to share the same concerns over and over again. Because for the people that showed up today, it's like their third time that they're sharing their stories. So just I wanted to bring that up and ask that question about like, how do we make sure that we are collaborating?
I think so.
I heard we.
Well, I think obviously, we want to continue as a board to, be ambassadors in terms of bringing this information out.
So one of the goals the board set for me was to have listening sessions and invite public more intentionally to speak to me or to come talk with me about what's happening. So, so those listening sessions are an attempt to meet that goal, right? So I understand that there's the visioning committee work, which I'm a part of, so I know what's happening there. Merrick's a part of it. We've talked about it, Rhett and Seiji. So I'm a part of that work, so I know the work that's happening there. I will say that in my 4 years, it's not atypical that when there is an event that involves the superintendent, that the same people come. It's not atypical. It's a reality. I'm not sure how to get around it. So I think that, yeah, it is collaboration, and there's some work that I've been asked to do by the board. So I'm working on doing that.
And I just want to echo, I agree with Jim on that it's also on us to, for example, I hosted one of those listening sessions around literacy intervention. And so I think it's
part of me hosting that is my responsibility to keep the folks who showed up to that and the people that they, and then, I know that, anyway, the folks who showed up to that and the others who care about that, a continual part of the conversation. And so that we ensure that what the concerns that they have brought are responded to. Sometimes that response is that's not at the top of the list right now, but here's where it is on the list. And sometimes that response is, we're tackling that right now and we need to know more from you in order to be able to do what we need to do. So, but I just think, I don't think that's all on Libby. I think it's also part of the board, because that's one of our duties, is to represent the community and be that bridge to the community.
Yeah, and people did ask, like, what are you gonna do with this information? And people did say, you keep asking us the same question, and like we keep showing up, so I just want to make sure that we're not overdoing it, and that we respond to them and then go back. And so, like, I just think that collaboration, Libby, with like both of us as a board and you with the community session, just being intentional about, like, we already have this feedback. Let's make sure that we respond, or like, if we're gonna do it, to say, hey, if you haven't been part of the other ones, so they don't have to share the same stories over and over again. I just because it is overburdened to spend, in 1 month, 3 hours to say the same thing. And so I appreciate it, because I joined as a parent and was able for the first time to share, because I hosted the other ones and I didn't speak anything because I was as a school board member, and I really wanted to share my experience as a parent with a special ed child. So that was helpful for me as an individual. I should have sent my husband, but I'm the one that kind of deals with a lot of the things with Henry. So I just would welcome more collaboration to be able that we're not overburden the stories, because it is hard to say the same thing over and over again.
Facilities committee update. Who is?
I can do that.
Great.
If desired. So I think it's fair to say that the facilities committee's back. I'm sure.
Don't call it a comeback. Don't call it a comeback.
That's an interesting, but we did convene, and we had our reunion meeting last Friday, and we are getting kind of our priorities back in place, and realizing, as I'm looking at our homework that I didn't do, which is to bring our charge back to the board and have you all at least take a look at it and provide comment, but we will find a time and a place to do that. But I think generally what we're thinking in terms of how the facilities and energy committee functions as like a sounding board to administration, who is, on the ground at the schools. In my opinion, we are deeply blessed to have Andrew Rosa, who is incredibly effective and has started to produce annual facilities reports. And it's just a comprehensive look at our facilities across the district, all 4 schools, updating us about projects completed, projects needed, timelines, and it's just incredibly helpful to help frame our thinking and our work and our outreach to community and what we should be kind of reaching out to them about. So, and that is going to be before the board, the FY22 facilities report will be before all of us on April 6th. So our committee will be providing some feedback on that in advance of that meeting directly to Andrew. He's also given us a couple of other studies to look at. The window replacement study, which I can't wait to dig into. And I just think it's amazing that he creates all these protocols around how to really systematically figure out the best thing to do, from just practicality to cost efficiency. It just feels really thoughtful, and I feel we're very well supported. So. And then the other one is the track viability study. So we definitely have some things to really sink our teeth into and get. And I did know that you mentioned the parking lot, which I will jot down to be on our radar as well. So those three reports we're going to be sinking into, and then we also have been contacted by MIAC, Montpelier Energy Advisory Committee, I believe, which I looked back and I think they came to us in April of last year, which somehow I think I was just starting, so I was on title late with school working along. So anyhow, so they've been reaching out to us very actively. So we have a need and a role to have a meeting with them, kind of refresh on what their priorities are now that their official report is out. So that's happening. And then a big priority for us is going to be scheduling building tours. So we have, as of today, come up with a date for the first building tour, which will be at Union Elementary School on Wednesday, March 30th, before the board meeting, from 4:30 to 6. I believe Dr. Merrick may join us, and they're also doing the groundwork to reach out to the Earth Group to see if we can get a representative from there as well to join us, which is great. And then the goal is to generally try to get these facilities tours completed within 2 months-ish. So that's happening. What else did I miss?
I think you covered it.
Wow.
Nice. Thank you. Emma?
It's Kristen. Yeah. Oh, and we're also joined by Seiji, who's on,
Yes.
vacation.
It's in Maui.
Yeah.
No jealousy.
Yeah.
No jealousy.
Yeah. That's what I got.
Great. Any questions for the?
The whole board, of course, is welcome to join
Yes.
on
Yeah.
March 30th from 4:30 to 6.
Yeah, so I'll
right?
get an agenda to Anna and then hopefully that'll go out to everybody, but absolutely everybody's welcome.
And I've,
Yeah, and
I've said it before, walking through that building, even if you're a parent and you've been there a bunch with Andrew's and Andrew's eyes, is a totally different experience.
Yeah, it's totally worth doing. Yeah, we should remind Seiji too, because I think there's a building or two hasn't been in yet, so. Second reading of the C14 policy regarding 504.
Could I suggest that we maybe move that to the next meeting because the policy committee hasn't met since our last board meeting when we received some feedback on that about potentially drafting like a little introductory explanation of why we're going to adopt this policy. And we just haven't had an opportunity to do that yet. So it might be nice to push it.
That's okay for us to do. We don't have to do them one.
We just did 3 public readings, right?
Yeah, you could also say this is the second reading and then come back for the third reading with that.
Yeah, could we add a 4th reading if we needed to?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could do it either way.
All right, great. I don't think we don't take action. Third reading. Okay, so we'll have a third reading where the policy committee will weigh in, and if we need another reading, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, we just need a minimum of 3, but we can add. So, motion to adjourn.
No, I have one thing, sorry, that I realized that I cannot be in the selection committee because there's a meeting on tomorrow, the same one. I thought the interviews was the 30th.
You don't need to come tomorrow. We're just naming questions tomorrow.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, don't worry about that. We can catch you up. If you have questions that you want to ask, just send them to me so your voice can be at the table.
Okay, okay.
Great. Thank you for doing that, Amanda. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Roxbury.